Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation to be here today. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Let me ask you a question. How many people here are in a relationship? Let me see your hands. Okay. Every hand should go up. Every hand should go up because everybody is in a relationship. From home, with siblings, with people from school. Now, if I asked the question differently and said, how many are in a romantic relationship, let me see your hands. Okay, about the same as before. All righty. Well, today I want to talk to you about those relationships and how and why they are the way that they are. All of us have been raised in our homes and we've been taught certain things. And today I want to talk to us about the family systems. Sorry. Family systems in relationships and how they work. How many people here have heard of that before? Family systems theory. Okay, just a few hands. And the idea behind family systems theory is that each family has a system that they learn to go by. They learn to operate by. Each family has a system that's created that teaches it and tells it how to operate and how to work. What to think and how to behave. What to believe and how to reach out into the world and do what families are supposed to do. Now, sometimes what happens in families is we just go by the wind and it just kind of happens. And we don't really put a lot of thought into it. But a system is still created, whether you're intentional about it or not. And what we take away from that system as children affects the relationships that we have that are succeeding that family relationship, that preeminent one. You know, we talk a lot about in society how society has a way of determining who your kids are and how they're going to be and what society's doing to our children. Well, family has much more power, much more say in the development of a child than it thinks, than it realizes. And we like to put it all on society out there. But the home is the primary place where values, where ideas, where beliefs, attitudes, character traits, where all of these things are passed from family systems onto their progeny. How many psych majors do I have here? Okay, therapists? All right, good. So you know about schemas, right? Schemas are those ideas, the way we think about things that kind of set themselves in stone and don't want to change. Stuck points are ideas that we believe about ourselves, whether they're good or bad, that kind of grow on their own and they don't move. They don't want to die. That we have to break through sometimes because in therapy we have to do that. We have to learn how to break through some of those stuck points so that we can progress, so that we can grow. Insecurities and strengths, all these things that are passed by onto us from family to generations afterwards. So when a family system says and suggests that each one here is a conglomeration of past experiences, past failures, past successes, how we managed them, how we interpreted them, and how they make us behave the way we behave today. Do you know what those things are in your life? Are you able to connect the dots between the experiences that you've had with the relationship that you're in right now? Have you figured out why you act the way you act? Have you figured out why you've chosen the people, that person to be in a relationship with? Why did you pick that one? Because they're handsome? Because he's good looking? Because she's beautiful? All important. Don't get me wrong. It's important to have a relationship where you're attracted to the other person, of course. There's nothing wrong. But if that's all that is, if that's all you've done in your relationship, yikes. I'll go ahead and say it. Yeesh. That's a scary thought. What have you really done in your relationships that helps you to understand the other person altogether? What are their experiences? What have they been through? What are some of their schemas? What are some of their experiences, good or bad, that has created the person that you've attached yourself to? And why did you pick them is what we're going to talk about today. Because we rarely think about that. We rarely talk about that. But in counseling with folks and working with people in treatment, I recognize that there have been patterns that have been created in people's lives over and over and over, and unbeknownst to them, they're completely oblivious to it all until somebody can sit down with them and tell them, hey, look, I'm seeing a pattern. This is what I'm seeing. What do you think? And then the eyes get open. So today I'm hoping, maybe just a little bit, that the eyes get a little bit open because relationships are important. especially with the ones that you want to spend the rest of your life with, right? Yeah. You got to be careful. There's a lot of things to consider. So let's go on. I want you to consider some people in the scriptures that we think about. Think of Noah. Think of the family dynamics with Noah. Think of what he went through with his family. Not long after the flood, what's Noah doing? He's planting a vineyard. He's growing grapes. What does he do with the grapes? Yeah, you would think that he learned, but something in his psyche, some schema, some rolled on in his head that made him think, you know what? I think I'm going to make some wine and get drunk. Right after the flood. Until one of his sons does something to him that's just so egregious, and he pronounces a curse on him. What a strange family dynamic. What is it that caused him to go there? What is it that caused him to think that way? What is the pattern that was established in their lives? You would think, at least we do, in retrospect, he should know better. But do we? Consider Abraham. Abraham, who takes a wife, his wife's handmaiden, has a child by her, and ends up having a kid of his own. I mean, think about it. Just the family dynamic between Isaac and Ishmael. What happened between those two would make an interesting counseling session for a therapist. To sit them down and say, okay, what were you thinking? Where was your head? And they said, well, I always thought it was okay, and this and that, and yeah. So in our relationships, we need to think about what we have been pre-programmed to think in ways that we behave that may be reoccurring in our life today, in your relationships today. Let me ask you this question. How well do you think families are doing today compared to them? Have we gotten any smarter? I'm seeing smiles. That's why I think the answer might be no to a lot of us. Have we gotten any better? Any wiser? We may have gotten more intellectually knowledgeable and smarter. I mean, because of technology, they didn't have this back then. You know, little clickers, they didn't have these things. But the people, the person, who they are, how they operated, nothing's changed. In fact, it's just got a little bit more sophisticated, hasn't it? There's a little bit more trials in our lives nowadays than there was back then, because there's so much more that we're exposed to nowadays that affects our relationships. So I want to discuss with you 3 typical family dynamics that I've come across working as a chaplain and working in therapy with my spouse that we have come in contact with and working in drug treatment as well. I want to share with you some things that I've learned, and perhaps maybe then you can learn something, or at least have a little bit more information when it comes to the relationships that you're in. All right, so let's proceed. First family dynamic is the critical home. I run against this a lot. This is the critical home where nothing is done right. Where whatever you do, it's never good enough. You do your best, and you got an A, and the response is, why didn't you get an A+? You cut the grass, but you didn't rake the leaves. You washed the car, but you missed a spot, right? Have you been in a home like that? Don't answer. That's just for you. I'm not here to call anybody out, all right? But you can do it on the inside. Never good enough. A lot of times the silent treatment is used in this home, and there's lots of blame and lots of judgment in a critical home. This is when we sit around the table and our parents are talking about the neighbors, or the pastor, or the chaplain, or whoever it is, and the children pick that up. You think that's not going to affect their relationships later on? No, they'll pass it on to their progeny as well. So if you've been in that kind of a relationship, ask yourself some questions and look at sometimes the responses that you might get as you're in one of those relationships. In those kind of relationships, we tend to become very submissive because the criticism is so strong. It is so consistent. I mean, it's like it never ends. We become very submissive. We just give in. We just give in and say, you know what? Yeah, I'm not going to fight this anymore. So, okay. And we don't say anything. We learn to tolerate bad behavior. I run into this a lot in drug treatment. They get shamed into believing the criticism. Their low self-image is through the roof. And they may even feel unworthy of God's grace eventually. You know, when I work drug treatment, a lot of times this low self-esteem, this low image of themselves is because they came from a critical home. And it gets repeated in their head, and they play that tape over so many times that they find people that support that kind of thinking. They tend to find the same kind of person that's critical because it's become the norm. The behavior becomes so embedded in us that we end up finding the people that continue that process over and over. And I asked them the question, I said, so who is it that told you that you don't matter? And a lot of times their heads will bow and the tears will start flowing. And they'll talk about how mean mom was or how dad was or how their family was and how tough it was. And so they just don't feel good enough. So ask yourself the question, if you've been in a home like that, are you settling for relationships today? Are you thinking, I can't get any better because I don't deserve any better, because mom and dad said I don't deserve any better? And you don't look for better because you don't think you're worth it. Do people ask you, why do you put up with that all the time? Why do you listen to him? Have you heard those conversations before? Why do you let her say that? You know, those kinds of things. Are you easily shamed into submission? Have you lost your voice? Where is your self-worth? Ask yourself these questions. If you've come from a home like that, if those questions need to be asked yourself in your current relationship now, has that pattern been established? The second kind of a home is the addicted home, and I've worked with this a lot. In an addicted home, there's lots of lies, there's lots of abuse, there's lots of instability, there's lots of trauma. Nothing is settled, everything's up in the air, constantly moving, running from creditors, selling and pawning, all kinds of drama and chaos. It's just absolutely phenomenal what happens in an addicted home. Well, they have found, Wakeshire Cruz has found, and others that have studied family systems and addicted families, that there are certain roles that the children take in these homes. The first one, most of the time it's not the child that's the enabler, is the chief enabler is usually the spouse. This is the spouse that covers for the drug addict, or the alcoholic. Calls the boss and says, my husband's sick. He's so sick he couldn't call, he asked me to call you. So he can continue on, get over his drink for the rest of the day, and get ready for work the next day, hopefully. But the chief enabler, covers and does all that kind of things to preserve the home. And as a result, the behavior enables that system, the addiction, to remain in the home. The hero of the family is a child who's usually the straight-A student, class valedictorian, most popular, good kid. You would never know she had problems at home or he had problems at home because they're such good kids. And they put on a really good air and they present a good picture. The scapegoat of the family is the one that gets blamed for everything the drug addict or the alcoholic is doing. So the scapegoat then is the reason the family has problems. And the scapegoat, that person will say, you want to call me the scapegoat? All right, I'll show you who's the scapegoat. I'll be the scapegoat. And they put that mantle on, and boy, do they go to town. They say, you're going to call me this? I'm going to be this. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So he lives up to it, takes the blame, takes the hits, and does all these things to cope with the chaos and drama. I'll pay you back. I'll show you. And continuing on, there is a clown in the family, makes jokes to cope with life, usually gets uncomfortable when things are getting tense, getting serious in a relationship. This is a person in a therapy session that's in a group session when the topic is heavy and the emotions are getting stirred, they'll crack a joke in a heartbeat. Let me ask you this. Does your significant other crack jokes and not able to get to that emotional level that you need them to be in, and they'd much rather just joke about it instead? Then you may be dealing with a clown, because they learn how to cope this way. And in my own home, it's that way. We get together, we talk about how we got in trouble, when we were reprimanded, and we laugh about it. Until one day, I decided to do something different. I said, you know what, that really stunk growing up. I didn't like it. That really hurt. I was scared. Could have heard a pin drop. Until somebody cracked a joke about me being serious, because we all learned how to develop that. And we didn't even have an alcoholic home. It was just a traumatic home. The lost child is that child that just fades into the woodwork, just hides from everybody, just becomes a wallflower. Nobody hears of this person. Nobody sees anything. They just kind of fade into the backdrop. And that's exactly where they want to be. Kind of like the middle child syndrome. Any middle children here? Yeah, think about it. If you have a sibling that's a middle child, watch and see. See if I'm not right. The third dynamic is the controlling home. The controlling home is there is no freedom. And usually as a result, when you have a home that's very controlling, your response is to be very aggressive. Passively or just directly aggressive. There's a lot of suspicion in this home because you can't be trusted. In this controlling home, one person usually has to dominate. They have to be right. Yeah? You ever experienced this? You know what I'm talking about? I was in the military. There was always somebody that had to be right. It was not fun to have one person that was always right. And whatever, even when he was wrong, he was always right. So, yeah, it's tough. It's hard when you're growing up in a family like that. There's a lot of distrust. People in this kind of a home don't enter their opinions about anything. They learn to be very quiet. They don't develop a voice. And chances are when they're in this kind of a relationship at home, they're going to replicate it when they get out. And all of these scenarios that I've just explained to you, they are going to replicate it when they get home or when they get their own relationships. There is a theory in avoidance behaviors that says that which we're trying to avoid, we generally make it happen. A person that is suffering from being abandoned will generally find somebody who will abandon them. So subconsciously they can say, well, see, there it is. I told you, it always happens because the pattern's there. So if you know these things are going on in your life and you just try to avoid them, guess what? Chances are you're going to find yourself attached to the thing you're trying to avoid. You ever look across the seat of that person that you're attached to and realize, man, he's just like my dad. Or she's just like my mom. I had a fellow who was in his 40s, 50s, older guy. I asked him, I said, I'm just so sick and tired of my wife, chaplain. And he described this woman as being very controlling. And then he told me, he got serious with me. He said, but there's a lady up the street I've been talking to. I said, really? Tell me about her. And he described the same woman. And he didn't catch it. And I said, hey, tell me about your mama. And mama was the same way. And I said, have you realized that you've been picking your mama every time? I had a relationship with him. So I was allowed to say that with him. And he stops and he goes, you know what, preacher man Ken, I think you're right. How did I do that? I said, well, we kind of do it subconsciously. It just happens. So what do we do then? Let me give you some suggestions. Slow down in your relationships. Take time. There's not a rush. There's no rush. Take the time, because if you're going to attach to somebody for the rest of your life, till death do us part, take the time to make sure you're doing it right. Figure out what's going on with you. Do some introspection. You know, a lot of times people will tell me and ask me why, and they'll give me a litany of things that are going wrong, and then they'll look at me and they'll tell me what the other person's doing wrong, and I'll stop it and I'll just say, why is it do you think you keep picking the same kind of people in your life? Because chances are they've gone through relationships that are exactly the same over and over. I said, why do you keep picking the same people? I put it back on them. Because it really has to do with us and what we've been through. So we need to do some introspection. Use your spiritual beliefs to inform you what a relationship ought to look like. Use those beliefs. Set that standard high. Because you need to take care of yourself in your relationships and make sure that they're healthy ones. And then if that's hard, find a good chaplain, find a good counselor, good pastor, somebody that can help you walk through the ebbs and flows, crooks and crannies of your life in those relationships, because they can get kind of weird at times. Right? Yeah? This means yeah. This means no, but yeah, chances are it's tough out there to figure out some things as we go along. So consider it, because you deserve the best in every relationship that you have. So take your time. Use your tools and be blessed. My name is Ken. Thank you for letting me share.